Okay, good morning. We are continuing Siman Kuf Tzadi, Hilchos Niddah. We are topic of Ksamim, Kesem, and we are starting Seif Chet. Okay, Kuf Tzadi, Seif Chet. Im ein beketem b'makom echad kegris v'od. Right, we didn't do this, right? If there is, you don't have one, the whole spot, the stain is not in one area, that's right, large enough, the gris ba'od. Afal pi sheyesham tipin harbe smuchin zela zeh, even though you have many spots close together, they're not touching, but they're close together, doesn't matter. What do I mean? Ad she'im nitzarefem yesh behem yoter mikigris, even though if you would combine all the spots that are nearby, it would be more than a grease. I'm just going to keep saying grease, but even though it's grease v'o, then we already, right? Machlokas, let's say 2 centimeters, maybe a drop less. Anyways, so we're saying, even though it's mitzaref to be kegrease, it is tehora. Sha'anu telin kol tipa v'tipa ba'kina. Because since they're not touching, right? There we say that each spot comes from a different louse. Each one had so there's more than one lice in the room, and that's why it's not touching. So that's what we say. Ad sheyehebo kegris ve'od b'makom echad, until you have the entire, until it's all in one spot. It's all touching, and whatever touching is the size of a gris ve'od. V'yesh omrim dahani mili keshenim tzu al chaluka. Now, when do we say this? This is a yesh omrim. Now, obviously, I'll just point out as we right now, the halacha is like the yesh omrim. Dara Sabayis quotes the Beis David, who points out that you have to be careful whenever you read a stam v'yesh omrim. Sometimes the stam is just a quote from the Gemara, and it's not really a machloket rishonim, and it's the yesh omrim is the rishonim on the Gemara. So this yesh omrim is just a perush on what we previously read from the Gemara. The first part was the Gemara. This is the rishonim, and so therefore everyone agrees halachas ke yesh omrim in this case. It's not really a machlokas. V'yesh omrim dahani mili kishenim tzu al chaluka. That's the only time we say that each one individual that they're not touching, so you don't combine them. That's if you find it on a beged, in your clothing. But if she finds it on her skin or on her leg or whatever, so then mitztarfin legris ve'od. So then, if there are multiple spots, then you do combine them, because normally we say ketem, it's not the actual period, and it's not, there was no bedika pnim. You find it on your skin. So normally we do say for that, see, if you do a bedikas pnim, or there's hargasha, then even a mashahu have done. But if there is no hargasha, no bedikas pnim, and she sees a spot on her leg, so then we assume so then that's the din of ketem. So normally it's still, all dine ketem need to be kegris, but here you could be mitzaref individual tipin of ktamim that are small ones that are nearby, but not touching. Okay, so tet. Tet. Ketem animsa al basara. Now she finds a ketem on her skin. All right, I was just going to point out, that's what it was. Again, just keep in mind that nowadays, because women usually wear tight undergarments, it changes the practical halacha a little bit all around. But anyway, that's just something to keep in mind. Tet, right? We're talking about normal cases in Chazal where they did not wear tight undergarments. Tet. Ketem hanimsa al basara. Now, if she finds a stain on her leg, shehu aruch kiretsua or agul, or whether it's long or round, o shahayu tipin, or they are drops, o shahaya orech haketem arochav yirecha, or it's long compared to the width of the leg, o shahaya nira ki'ilu hu mimata lamala, Hoel who connected bait, even though it looks like it's coming from below upward. I know. I guess the shape, kilo, it's a splash that's going upwards or running upwards. It doesn't matter as long as it's who keneged beit turpa, since it's beit turpa is basically it's a lashon ganai for the makom erva. That's what it says here. Perish kanayu kino erva tumeya. So as long as it's anywhere opposite that place, the makom of the erva, and basically down on the inside of her legs versus the outside of her legs, anywhere there, then we say tumeya. She's going to be tumeya. Ve'ein omrim ilu nataf minaguf lo haya kazeh. We don't say, well, if it came from her, it wouldn't look like this. In other words, any shape, if it's anywhere connected the makom and the inside, the inner part of her legs, as opposed to the very outside, then we say we assume it's from her. And therefore, if it's kegris va'ot, so then she's tumeya. Okay, let's do yud. Ketema shenimsa al davar she'eno makabel tuma. Okay, so we learned one major kula from Chazal on the Dinei Ktamim. Major category is it needs to be a minimum shear size. Okay. What about, here's another one. It has to be, in order for the woman to be makabel tuma, in order for a woman to be timeya from the blood, the item that she finds the ketem on, the halacha is this, right? This din darabanan of ketem. It must be that it's makabel tuma. It has to be an item that's ra'oy the makabel tuma. Okay, if it's something that cannot be makabel tuma, they were lo gazru alav. Okay, so that's halacha mefareshet, and in Torah Tashlamim, he just points out there are some. We're not going to go through all hilchos. Taros over here regarding what's Makabel Tuma or not. That's for another time. But Torah Shalomim, interesting, points out there are different levels of kalim or begadim that can be Makabel Tuma. For example, there are some things that are Makabel Tuma for Nagayim, but not for other stuff. So therefore, he just points out, Tosfos and the Rosh point out, as long as it's good enough to be Makabel Tuma for Nagayim, so then it is good enough to be makabel tuma to reach this category to be ketem and to make her tumeya. Okay. So this doesn't apply to bedika. Again, ketem is when you find the blood on the skin or her garments. When you do a bedika, also inserting a tampon, that's also same category. We assume it's dam temeya de araisa, so it has nothing to do with the din of ketem. In order to, if a woman has bleeding with hargasha, she's temeya de araisa, even if there's no, for one tiny drop. There's no minimum. It doesn't matter if it's lands on something that's makabel tuma. And if you do a bedika, then we assume you found a drop of blood with hargasha, but you didn't feel the hargasha. Again, there's a tumah vadai, tumah safek, but we treat it like vadai tumeya, even if it's not makabel tumah, because for hargasha and for dini de araisa, this whole halacha has nothing to do with the din de araisa. So, in order for a woman to become a niddah or a zava all during the year, it has nothing to do with kagris, and nothing to do with makabel tuma, nothing to do with colored clothing that we're going to see going on. Okay. Now, lama look. Why didn't they word goes there on something that's not makabel tuma? In other words, they built into this din darabanan of ketem, where they said they're going to retract and minimize the din darabanan, and so they're going to leave out anything that is not makabel tuma. So a couple of reasons are given. Most simple to understand, or to explain rather, is from the Rashba, because he says it wasn't common. Lo matzah. Anything that's not common, usually we're talking about a regular garment that you find it on, and therefore it's makabel tuma. So on these things they were gozer, but it wasn't so common. that she would find the ketem on something that's not makabel tuma, and so therefore lo gazru. Right? Many times we have a lo plug, lo shriach, lo matzoi, whatever it is. There no one goes there. That's one of the calling when they made their xeris. Right? They chose one to and one not to. So obviously, there's probably another feature that Chazal were looking. We're going to see this by clothing, colored clothing, that sometimes they didn't want to overburden Klal Yisrael, and so therefore they looked for certain times where they can make it not always Tameya, so it doesn't always apply. Okay, Tosfos and Ran, so they're similar, slightly different wording, but basically along the same lines. They both say because why were Chazal gozer ktamim in general? We know that a woman who's a Niddah or a Zava, she sees bleeding, Hagasha, she's Tzmeya, and you can, that's the din Torah. Why did they add this extra din of you find blood? There is for sure no Hargasha. So for sure there's no worry of her being Tmeya whatsoever. There's no chashash. What's the siyag l'Torah? What's going on? They were a machmer for the sake of taharas. Chazal were very machmer. That's why we wash hands all year long, for eating bread. For the kohanim, when they get back to worrying about shumas taras, so then, anyways, or back then they were, but anyways, the whole Chazal, we know there's a lot of dinei derabanan that has to do with Tumah Tara. So, thank you. So the only time, try again. So the only time that we were, so the whole reason to make the din of ketem is because of kalim and taros. So therefore, if it's landing on an object that's anyway not makabel tuma, and anyway it's going to stay tahor, why are we going to bother the women or the people and make her tamei? Because the main issue was for the kalim, not for her. So if the main issue is going to stay tahor, then we're not going to be gozer and make her tamei. Okay. Let's go on. Ketzad. So the Gemara gives an example of what's not makabel tuma, badka karka olam. So she sees blood on the ground underneath her, right where she was sitting. She was sitting on the floor, whatever. It's on the floor. Oh, beta kise she'eno makabel tuma. I'm not sure exactly what he's referring to, but our toilets. These are yeah, some kind of I don't know exactly what they look like, but some kind of a toilet in those days that was on the floor or just a hole in the ground. Maybe they had some kind of, I don't know, I don't know what they put around the hole. But anyways, Lamaisa for our toilets are also considered karka olam, and it's not makabel tuma. Okay? Even if you were to say a chair could be makabel tuma, again, depends on what material it's made out of, but that's a whole nother sugya. Not all materials are makabel tuma, but if it's a chair, if it's a bedekis, it's attached to the ground. That's karka olam, and therefore it's for sure not makabel tuma. So she remains tahara. Oh, kol davar she'enu makabel tuma. Anything that's not makabel tuma, right, cannot be makabel tuma. V'yashva alav, and she sits on it. Umatza bo ketem, and now there's a little drop of blood, the size of a grease. Right? Otherwise, it wouldn't even be an issue. V'chein ketem shenimtza al beged savua tahara. Also, on any garment that has color, it's a colored garment, and therefore it's tahara. All right, if it's okay, v'lefitach tilba sheisha bigdei tziv'onim kedei lehatzila meyak tamim. So therefore, it is wise for a woman when she's tahara to wear colored clothing. Don't wear white, so that if there's any blood there, or you don't have to worry about ktamim. Right, if it's the regular flow, obviously that's another story. But anytime you just see some spotting, even if it's bigger than a grease. So again, right, we discussed what's the maximum. I don't know, but basically, but as long as it's okay, so then you don't. It helps a lot to save problems of ktamim. Also, if you're not sure, maybe it's paint, maybe it's this, maybe it was blood. You're not sure where it came from, something else. You don't have to worry about it if she's wearing colored clothing. So here, so I'll just mention, why is colored clothing, I think we're going to, I'm not sure. I'll mention it now because we just mentioned that if it's colored clothing, then it doesn't matter how big it is. But like I mentioned, it's discussed somewhat in the poskim, and I guess different masoras and how to pass on what to do lamaisa. Because if you have a big flow of bleeding, we assume that that's, even if it's not a din of ketem, we assume it's temea deraisa at some point. That's the so where do you go? I saw somewhere say it as minimal as the size of 3 grisim, but that could be an absolute das yachid. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know at what point do you say it's enough blood that you say, okay, now it's not an issue of ketem anymore. Now it turns into the realm of dam niddah daraisa. So that's I don't know. It's beyond me, but. Right, but anytime it's colored or eno makabel tuma, it doesn't matter even if it's more than a grease. And if it's less than a grease, all this, then if it's on white or if it is makabel tuma, also it's going to be not a problem of ketem. Again, we're going to see some exceptions to the rule. Let me just mention, when it comes to colored clothing, I don't know if it's in the Shulchan Aruch, so I'll just say, the Gemara points out in Niddah Samach Aleph, happens to be a discussion over there, if there goes there by big date sivonim by colored clothing, but the halacha is clear. Anytime it's colored, then she's not. She stays tahara. It could be makabel tuma, but since it's colored clothing, then she's not. And the Gemara says basically the wording is more or less to make it lahakel to make it easy for Klal Yisrael. Again, it looks like they were looking for ways not to be gozer all the time. So we're gonna get there, and Rashi adds, again, I don't know if, I think he's coming to explain the Gemara, but he says if it's one of the reason why they were also not gozer by colored clothing is because it's too hard to know if it has the color of blood or not. Especially in those days, they used to make distinctions between red and red. And they would say, oh, you can have 10 different reds. And they'd say, this one is tahor and this one is tameh. Nowadays, we all say red is red and we don't know, and everything's tameh. Makes her tameh. But anyways, because once it's colored, it changes the red or it changes the color. And therefore, and it's hard to know what's red, so therefore they were makel for that reason. I will just point out on very light colored clothing, that's a machlokas. If very light colored is considered white for this halacha or not, if there could be ketem or not, and then how you define what's very light. That's that. And I'll just also point out something interesting. Let's say you have a two-sided beged. One side is white and one side is colored, right? Or like two begadim are sewn together, two fabrics sewn together. So even though it enters on one side, the colored side, and then on the other side you see a clear stain on the white side, so Ravadia and Taras Abayis, it's mentioned in Pischei Tara that it's considered Temeya. She is Temeya because it's always, you look at what you see, you look at what you get, and when you look at it, you have to look at both sides, and one side has the ketem and one side doesn't. Both sides have the ketem, and the one that has, and one of them is white. So because of the white side, even though it goes through, that doesn't matter. We don't look at the traveling patterns. We look at the item itself. Assuming that the color from the other side doesn't affect the yeah. Take into any other issues. Yeah. If it's a running color, if it's runs, and okay. What else did I want to point out before we move on? The Shach has an interesting point. He says, so again, we're not going to get into, I'm going to mention a few different materials, but we're not going to get into, it's not going to be, we're not doing a full share on different materials. But what I will point out also we'll go over some. In the Shach, in Ted Zayin, so he points out that, it's Davar Pshutim, it's not the Shach's Chedushim, but anyways, he just points out that even if the material is makabel tuma, but it's a piece of clothing that's smaller than 3 by 3. 3 what? Etzba. 3 etzbaot. By 3 etzbaot is the minimum shear in general for, again, there's different materials, different rules, but in general, the minimum shear is going to be minimum possible shear for a beged to be called a beged, to be makabel tuma, is 3 by 3 etzbaot. Um, 1 second. And if it's smaller than 3 by 3, then also, even if it's white, even if it's a grease, even if it's 1 second. Yeah. And also, it's not going to be makabel. It's also not going to be, and it wouldn't, the material would be makabel tuma, but this beged is not makabel tuma. So therefore, she would stay tahara, even if it's okay, even if it's a maradam. What is 3 by 3? So we've had this before. Each etzba, a machlokas, Chaim Na, if it's 2 centimeters, and the Chazon Ish, if it's 2.5. Moshe's in between, but closer to the Chazon Ish. So that comes out to 6 by 6 centimeters, or 2.3 inches, 7.5 by 7.5, or 3 inches by 3 inches. It is noted that Chazon Ish generally held his opinions l'chumra, but I saw someone say, but since Ketem is derabanan, even the Chazon Ish would probably agree. You could go by the bigger shear versus Rav Chaim Na for this halacha. Again, depends if you always hold by Rav Chaim Na or not. Okay, just a couple quick things on materials that are makabel tuma. So most poskim point out, if not all, plastic in general is not makabel tuma. There is a discussion about it, but in general, we assume plastic is not one of the materials in the Torah that's makabel tuma. Rubber cannot be makabel tuma. Paper, most poskim say it's not makabel tuma. Chasam Sofer says it's not. No, W. Yehuda says it is. But again, depends how you define or what kind of paper you're looking at. There's paper and there's paper. You can have very thin paper, very thick paper, different materials, and you can and it could be what's it called, disposable. Igros Moshe writes that according to everybody, our toilet paper or tissue paper, even the Nodia Yehuda would agree it's not makabel tuma. It doesn't last, too thin, it dissolves, and anyway, so it's not makabel tuma. So Lamaisa, we generally say paper and toilet paper is not makabel tuma. Synthetic clothing, so that's a machlokas. I'll just say Minchas Yitzchak says it is tamei, Sheva Halevi says it's tahor. Synthetic clothing, nylon and other stuff like that. This is all regarding kesem. If you take a synthetic cloth and do a bedika with it, you're going to be, the woman's going to be tahar. It's going to be tamei. She's going to be tamei deraisa. That's the assumption. We assume tamei deraisa. Again, vada, safek, whatever, but that's the assumption. Igros Moshe says it depends. If with nylon, if it's made from vegetables, then since vegetables can be, so therefore the nylon is makabel tuma. But if it's made from oil, it's tahor. Anyways, different opinions how to deal with synthetic. Maybe I'll save. Let me point this out because I don't know if I'm gonna get there. Anything that's samud laguf, we might have to do this tomorrow. Anything that's attached or like presses tightly against the skin, that's a separate category. So undergarments that we wear that's attached to the place, or pads, synthetic napkins, things like that. So that's all. It may or may not be makabel tuma. We're going to get there. But regardless, that happens to be a machlokas, which we'll explain. That's a separate category. Even if it's not makabel tuma, it still might be a problem, or it might be makabel tuma. I just want to point out something here. Yeah. This is for Dini Tuma Torah. It's the same thing for Tvilas. So there, the question is by Tvilas Kalim. The question is if it needs. Actually, this has nothing to do with Tvilas. It's very different than Tvilas Kalim. There's a little overlap, but it's certainly very different when we go through the principles over there, which we discussed before. Here, I just want to point out, if a person, since we mentioned paper, if a woman wipes herself with toilet paper, so, and there is a blood stain, it's white, it's a blood stain more than a grease, is that a problem? So most say, we mentioned, that it's not a makabel tuma. However, it's a machlokas. Why? Because we know that a blood that you find on your skin can be a ketem. You don't need a body's makabel tuma too, but it's not a kli. It's a separate category. And so, since blood that's found on one's skin can make her tamea by a ketem, if it's the size of a grease, so too, anything that's you wipe yourself with in that space, or we're going to see if it's tightly pressed against that area, so then I don't mean more tight than normal. Just it's against the body. So then it's a machlokas. So there, the Tzemach Tzedek and Rav Yashiv are machmer, because we consider it's as if she found it bifsara, because it's like it's on your skin. You know you wiped it from your skin, and you wiped it, and it started out on the skin, and now it ended up on your cloth. It's not like you found it on the cloth. That's the normal din of ketem. You find it for the first time on a beged. So that's, however, the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch and Tara Sabayis, that's Rav Avadia, so they are meko, and Shevet Alevi and others point out that you don't need to look. So they say, just don't look, and then you avoid the machlokas and you remain tahara. So when you wipe yourself, don't look for blood.